The email announcing Miles's divorce arrived on a Tuesday, a sterile, joint statement about mutual respect and moving forward. It was the kind of bloodless corporate memo two people send when they can no longer stand the sight of each other. I read it 3 times in my gray cubicle, the hum of the server room a dull drone in my ears. For a decade, Miles had been a fixed point in my constellation, my best friend from college, the one who married his high school sweetheart, the one who got the house in the suburbs and the golden retriever. He was the life I was supposed to want, but had somehow sidestepped for this quiet, solitary existence of takeout containers and unread books. My first thought wasn't sadness for him. It was a low, shameful thrum of something else, something I hadn't let myself feel in years. It was a door creaking open in a house I had long since boarded up. My second thought was that he was alone. The statement mentioned he'd moved out, and I pictured him in some soulless rental, surrounded by boxes and the ghost of a life he'd just amputated. I found his new address through a mutual friend. It was a small, half-renovated cabin about 2 hours north of the city, a place he and his ex-wife, Jessica, had bought as a weekend project and then promptly ignored. On Saturday morning, I packed a duffel bag with a change of clothes and a bottle of whiskey I couldn't afford, my heart hammering a nervous, unsteady rhythm against my ribs. I was going to check on my friend. That was the story I told myself. It was a good story. Plausible. Noble, even. It was also the most elaborate lie I had ever constructed. The cabin was more rustic than I'd imagined. The gravel drive crunched under my tires, a sound that felt too loud in the silent, pine-scented air. It was set back from a dirt road, nestled in a stand of tall firs. The porch sagged a little on one side, and the window frames were peeling, but smoke curled from the stone chimney, a thin gray ribbon against a brilliant blue sky. And then he was there. Miles stepped out onto the porch, wiping his hands on a rag tucked into the waistband of his jeans. He was different. The soft edges he'd acquired in 10 years of comfortable marriage were gone, planed away. His jaw was sharp, dusted with a weekend's worth of stubble, and his hair was longer than I'd ever seen it, curling over the collar of his worn flannel shirt. He looked leaner, harder. He looked like the boy I'd met in college, the one who smelled of cheap beer and confidence, and had a laugh that could make you forget your own name. He didn't smile, not at first. He just watched me get out of the car, his eyes, a startling, clear blue, taking in the sight of me like he was trying to solve a puzzle. Then, the corner of his mouth ticked up. It wasn't the easy, polite grin of his married years. This was a slow, knowing smirk. A little bit cocky. A little bit dangerous. "Leo," he said, his voice a low gravel that seemed to vibrate in the wood of the porch. "Look what the cat dragged in." "I came to check on you," I said, my voice sounding thin. I held up the bottle of whiskey like a peace offering. "Brought supplies." "Supplies," he repeated, the smirk widening. He finally moved, coming down the steps with a fluid grace that surprised me. He took the bottle from my hand, his fingers brushing mine. A jolt, small but sharp, went up my arm. "You always were the practical one. Get in here." I was just about to give up and start drinking paint thinner. He slung an arm around my shoulders, a casual, friendly gesture he'd done 1,000 times before. But it wasn't the same. His hand was heavy on my shoulder, his warmth seeping through my jacket. The scent of him filled my head, not the clean, suburban dad cologne he used to wear, but something raw and elemental. Wood smoke, sweat, and the faint, metallic tang of sawdust. I felt like I was breathing in for the first time in a decade. The inside of the cabin was a chaotic mess of half-unpacked boxes, tools, and stray pieces of furniture. It was one large room, with a kitchenette against one wall, a stone fireplace dominating another, and a sleeping loft overhead. It was a space stripped down to its essentials, much like the man currently living in it. He led me to a small, rickety table with 2 chairs. "Sorry about the mess," he said, not sounding sorry at all. He grabbed 2 dusty glasses from a box labeled "Kitchen." "Fragile." Jessica took the good stuff. He said her name without any inflection, like he was reading an item off a grocery list. I spent the rest of that day in a state of protracted observation. I offered to help, and he put me to work sanding a reclaimed wooden beam he planned to install as a mantelpiece. I sat on the floor, the coarse paper in my hand, and watched him. I watched the muscles in his back and shoulders shift under his flannel shirt as he measured and sawed. I watched the way he'd bite his lower lip when he was concentrating, a habit I'd forgotten he had. He moved with a purpose I hadn't seen in him since we were 20. In his married life, he'd seemed muted. A comfortable, well-cared-for man. This version of Miles was raw, unplugged. He was rebuilding his house, and it seemed he was rebuilding himself at the same time, board by board. I was quiet, and he didn't push me to talk. We worked in a comfortable silence, punctuated by the scrape of my sandpaper and the whine of his power saw. Every so often, he would catch me looking. He wouldn't smile or say anything. He would just hold my gaze for a beat too long, his blue eyes unreadable, before turning back to his work. Each of those moments was a tiny detonation in my chest. My mind, always my own worst enemy, went into overdrive. What does that look mean? Is he just lonely? Am I imagining this? The line between friendly concern and the deep, abiding ache I felt for him had never been so blurry. I was an archaeologist, dusting off the fossil of a crush I had tried to bury years ago, and finding it wasn't a fossil at all. It was dormant, but it was still alive. That evening, we ate chili he'd made, sitting at the small table. Our knees brushed under it, and I flinched, pulling away. Sorry, I mumbled, my face hot. Miles just looked at me, a forkful of chili halfway to his mouth. It's a small table, Leo. He didn't move his leg. He left it there, a warm, solid presence just an inch from mine. A challenge. An invitation. I didn't know which. My own leg felt like it was cast in lead. I couldn't move it toward him. I couldn't move it away. So I just sat there, every nerve ending in my body aware of the scant distance between us. Later, as he was showing me how to work the ancient wood stove, he guided me, placing his hand on the small of my back to move me closer. It was a simple, instructive touch. It shouldn't have meant anything. But his hand was so warm, his palm pressing firmly against my spine. It wasn't a fleeting gesture. His hand lingered, his fingers splayed against my shirt. I could feel the heat of it through the fabric, a brand on my skin. I stopped breathing. Just us. The crackle of the fire. The scent of pine and whiskey. His hand on my back. My heart picks up pace. This is happening. Right here, right now, the air is changing. I can feel the barometric pressure dropping, the world narrowing to this single point of contact. He has to feel it, too. He has to feel the way my entire body has gone rigid, the way my breath is trapped in my lungs. He finally removes his hand, and the absence of it is a physical ache. He clears his throat. So you just keep feeding it logs every couple of hours, he says, his voice a little rougher than before. I nod, unable to form words. I feel scrutinized, stripped bare. He sees it. He has to see it. The yearning I've so carefully hidden for a decade is written all over my face, in the tremor of my hands, in the way I can't quite meet his eyes. I am a house of cards in a hurricane, and Miles is the storm. The next day, the breakthrough came from the most unexpected of places. Miles was determined to clear out the last of Jessica's boxes from the loft. Out of sight, out of mind, he declared with a false cheerfulness that didn't reach his eyes. I followed him up the ladder, feeling like his reluctant accomplice in erasing the past. Most of the boxes were filled with holiday decorations and old photo albums. But then we got to the last one. It was a sleek, black box with no label. Miles sliced it open with his utility knife and peered inside. His eyebrows shot up. Well, he murmured. He reached in and pulled out a device. It was futuristic looking, made of smooth, medical-grade silicone, with a series of buttons and a small digital display. It looked less like something for a bedroom and more like something you'd use to communicate with a distant starship. What is it? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Miles turned it over in his hands, a genuinely amused grin spreading across his face. This wasn't the polite smile or the cocky smirk. This was pure, unadulterated mischief. I believe, he said, his eyes sparkling. This is the Opals 5000. Jessica bought it after reading some article. Said it was supposed to recalibrate her chakras or something. I stared at the thing. It looked incredibly complicated. Intimidating. My cheeks burned with a heat that had nothing to do with the wood stove. She never even took it out of the box, he continued, pressing a button. The device hummed to life, a low, rhythmic vibration that we could both feel in the floorboards. A series of lights blinked in sequence. Wonder how it works. This was the moment. The pivot. My brain screamed at me to make an excuse, to climb back down the ladder and pretend this never happened. But Miles looked at me, his face a mask of playful innocence, and the absurdity of the situation was just too much. Me, the perpetually single, quiet observer, and him, the newly divorced instigator, alone in a cabin loft with a ridiculously advanced sex toy. A laugh escaped me, a short, strangled bark of sound. Miles's grin widened. See? You're curious too. I am not. I lied, but the blush crawling up my neck was a dead giveaway. Come on, Leo. For science, he coaxed, his voice dropping into a conspiratorial whisper. We're two intelligent guys. We should be able to figure this out. It's a puzzle. And that's how I found myself sitting cross-legged on the floor of a dusty loft, huddled with my decade-long crush, trying to decipher the user manual for the Opals 5000. The instructions were written in a dozen languages, with diagrams that were both clinical and deeply embarrassing. We devolved into fits of laughter, pointing at phrases like optimized pleasure algorithm and sonic wave escalation. The shared, ridiculous intimacy of it all was disarming. It stripped away the layers of caution and history between us, leaving us as just two friends laughing so hard they could barely breathe. In that moment, he wasn't the friend who got away, and I wasn't the sad sack pining on the sidelines. We were just two idiots in a cabin. After we'd finally given up and consigned the Opals 5000 back to its box, the laughter subsided into a comfortable quiet. We sat there for a long time, the dust motes dancing in the single beam of light from the window. The air between us had shifted again. The humor had burned away the awkwardness, leaving something softer and more fragile in its place. Hey, Leo, Miles said, his voice quiet. He was no longer looking at the box. He was looking at me, his expression serious. The playful glint was gone, replaced by a raw vulnerability that took my breath away. Yeah. He hesitated, picking at a loose thread on his jeans. Do you ever get lonely? The question was so direct, so unexpected, it felt like a punch to the gut. It was the question that lived in the marrow of my bones, the one I spent my entire life avoiding. I couldn't lie. Not now. Not after we'd just shared something so profoundly, stupidly human. I just nodded, my throat too tight to speak. He nodded back, a slow, sad acknowledgement. Me too, he whispered. Even when I wasn't alone. Maybe especially then, he finally looked up, and his eyes were glistening. I think I've been lonely for a really long time. It was a confession, a crack in the confident facade. He was letting me see the broken pieces he was trying to reassemble. In that moment of shared vulnerability, high up in that dusty loft, the last of my defenses crumbled. I wasn't just in love with the idea of him anymore. I was in love with this man, this broken, beautiful man sitting across from me, admitting he was just as lonely as I was. The rest of the day passed in a haze of heightened awareness. The easy camaraderie from the loft lingered, but underneath it, a new, more potent tension simmered. Every time our eyes met, I saw his confession reflected back at me. Me too. The words echoed in the space between us, a shared secret that was both a comfort and a torment. We ate dinner in near silence, but it wasn't the awkward silence of the night before. This was a heavy, loaded silence, thick with everything we weren't saying. The air crackled with it. I could feel his gaze on me as I ate, a physical weight. I kept my eyes on my plate, tracing patterns in the leftover chili with my spoon. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. Something had to give. After we cleared the plates, I retreated to the worn armchair by the fire, nursing the last of the whiskey. I pretended to be absorbed in the flames, but my entire consciousness was focused on Miles. He was moving around the main room, tidying things that didn't need tidying, the restless energy radiating off him. He was a caged animal. We both were. Finally, he stopped. He walked over and stood in front of my chair, blocking my view of the fire. I was forced to look up at him. He stood there, his hands shoved into his pockets, his expression unreadable in the flickering firelight. The silence stretched, taut and fragile. You've been watching me all weekend, Leo, he said, his voice low and steady. It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement of fact. The tipping point. What are you looking for? My mouth went dry. The directness of the question stole the air from my lungs. My carefully constructed facade of concerned friend shattered into a million pieces. There was nowhere left to hide. I had no answer. Or rather, I had an answer so huge and terrifying I couldn't possibly give it voice. I, I started, but the word died on my lips. I just stared up at him, my panic and my longing warring on my face. I felt exposed, pinned by his gaze like a butterfly to a board. He took a step closer, his knees almost touching mine. He leaned down, bracing his hands on the arms of the chair, trapping me. His face was inches from mine. I could see the flecks of gold in his blue eyes, could smell the whiskey on his breath, mingled with that scent of wood smoke that was uniquely him. "It's okay," he whispered, and the sound was impossibly gentle. "Because I've been watching you, too." My world tilted on its axis. The roaring in my ears wasn't just the fire anymore. It was the sound of a decade of silent yearning rushing to the surface. He knew. He'd known all along. Or maybe he'd only just figured it out, but it didn't matter. The secret was out, hanging in the supercharged air between us. He didn't wait for me to respond. He didn't need to. He slowly, deliberately, lowered his head. But he didn't kiss my lips. He pressed his mouth to the side of my neck, right over the frantic pulse hammering in my carotid artery. I gasped. It's not a kiss, it's a diagnosis. He's not asking, he's confirming. His lips are warm and firm against my skin, and I can feel the soft scratch of his stubble. He holds perfectly still, just breathing against my neck, and I feel like I'm going to come apart at the seams. He's checking my pulse with his mouth, and my entire body is screaming the answer. Yes, yes, it's always been yes. A shudder racks my frame. A low sound escapes my throat, a sound of surrender. That's all the encouragement he needs. He lifts his head, and his eyes are dark, intense. He searches my face for a fraction of a second, and whatever he finds there seems to be enough. Then he kisses me. It's not rushed or frantic. It's slow. It's deliberate. It's the most honest thing I have ever felt. His lips are soft but firm, and he tastes of whiskey and smoke and a loneliness that matches my own. He tastes like coming home. I lift a trembling hand and tangle my fingers in his hair, pulling him closer, deepening the kiss. It's a release, a dam breaking. 10 years of unspoken feelings, of watching from the sidelines, of quiet desperation, all pouring into this one perfect moment. He pulls back just enough to rest his forehead against mine. Our breath mingles. I can feel the tremor in his hands, which are still gripping the arms of the chair. He's not as unshakable as he seems. "Leo," he breathes, my name a prayer against my lips. I can't speak. I just lace my fingers with his on the arm of the chair, a simple, solid connection in the dizzying aftermath. It's enough. For now, it's everything. I woke up to the pale gray light of dawn filtering through the uncurtained windows. For a moment, I was disoriented, my body warm and heavy under a thick quilt. Then the memory of the night before crashed over me. The kiss, the feel of his mouth on my neck, the way we had eventually fallen asleep, fully clothed, on the narrow couch, my head on his chest, his arm wrapped securely around me. But the couch beside me was empty. Panic, cold and sharp, seized me. He was gone. The warmth beside me was fading. I sat up, my heart pounding a sick, frantic rhythm. Regret. He regretted it. It was a mistake, a rebound born of divorce and whiskey and loneliness. I was a momentary comfort, a port in his storm, and now, in the sober light of day, he had fled. My own internal sarcasm kicked in, a bitter defense mechanism. Of course he did. What did you expect? I swung my legs off the couch, the floorboards cold against my bare feet. The cabin was silent except for the faint, dying hiss of the embers in the wood stove. I scanned the room. His jacket was gone from the hook by the door. My stomach plummeted. He had actually left. He'd left me here in his half-finished life to find my own way out. I stood in the middle of the room, feeling foolish and profoundly, achingly alone. The hope that had bloomed in my chest last night felt like a cruel joke. I had let myself believe, just for a few hours, that I could have this. Then I could have him. Then I heard it. A sound from outside. The rhythmic thud of an axe splitting wood. I moved to the window, my hands trembling as I pushed aside the imaginary curtain. And there he was. He was at the edge of the woods, his back to the cabin. He wore the jacket he'd had on last night, and he was splitting firewood with a powerful, focused intensity. Each swing of the axe was clean and sure, sending a spray of wood chips into the frosty air. He wasn't running away. He was working. He was here. Relief washed over me so intensely my knees felt weak. I just stood there and watched him, my palm pressed against the cold glass of the window pane. He was real. Last night was real. A few minutes later, the back door creaked open and he came inside, his arms loaded with freshly split logs. His cheeks were flushed from the cold, and his breath plumed in the chilly air of the cabin. He stopped when he saw me standing there, awake. An unreadable expression crossed his face, and for a terrifying second, the awkwardness returned, thick and suffocating. We just stared at each other across the room. He broke the silence first. He walked over to the wood stove, his boots loud on the floorboards, and began carefully loading the logs inside. He didn't look at me. The fire was almost out, he said, his voice quiet, almost gruff. This was it, the moment of truth. Was he going to pretend nothing happened? Was I? I took a breath. I woke up and you were gone, I said, my own voice barely a whisper. I hated how vulnerable it sounded, how needy. He stopped what he was doing and finally looked at me. His blue eyes were clear, and the uncertainty I'd seen a moment ago was gone. He looked steady, solid. I didn't run away, Leo, he said, his gaze holding mine. Just making sure we don't freeze. He closed the door to the stove and wiped his hands on his jeans. He walked slowly toward me, closing the distance I had been so sure was now impassable. He stopped right in front of me. I woke up this morning, he said, his voice even lower now. And for the first time in I don't know how long, I didn't feel lonely. He reached out and took my hand. His fingers were cold from being outside, but his grip was warm and firm. He laced his fingers through mine, the same way he had last night. It was a simple gesture, but it was a reassurance, a confirmation. It said everything he wasn't saying with words. This is real. I'm not going anywhere. The test, I realized, wasn't whether he'd regret it. The test was what came next. The weekend was ending. I had a life, such as it was, back in the city. A job, an apartment filled with silence. The real world was waiting to intrude on this fragile bubble we had created. The drive home loomed in my mind, a symbol of the distance that could so easily reform between us. We made breakfast together, moving around the small kitchen in a comfortable, synchronized dance. It felt domestic. It felt natural. It felt terrifyingly good. We didn't talk about last night again. We didn't need to. It was there in every shared glance, every time our hands brushed as we reached for the same coffee mug. After we ate, the inevitable moment arrived. I started gathering my things, my movements slow and reluctant. I folded the shirt I'd worn yesterday, the scent of wood smoke clinging to it. Each item I placed back in my duffel bag felt like a step away from him, a step back into my old life. I was zipping up the bag when his hand closed over mine, stopping me. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Packing," I said, stating the obvious. "I have to get back. Work tomorrow." "Stay," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a quiet command. I looked at him, my heart clenching. "Miles, I can't just—" "Why not?" he interrupted, his gaze intense. "What's back there that can't wait another day?" He had me. A gray cubicle. An empty apartment. A life lived in the margins. He was offering me the center. He let go of my hand and walked over to a hook by the door where a spare set of keys hung. He took one off the ring. He came back and pressed it into my palm, closing my fingers around the cold metal. "That's the spare," he said. "In case you want to come back. Or, in case you want to stay." I looked down at the key in my hand. It was heavy. It was real. It was a conscious choice, an offer of a shared future, however messy and undefined. It was everything I had ever wanted, offered to me so simply I could hardly believe it. I didn't say anything. I just opened my duffel bag, took out the shirt I had just packed, and set it on the chair. Miles smiled. A real smile this time. It reached his eyes, crinkling the corners, and it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. Later that afternoon, we sat on the sagging front porch, 2 mugs of coffee steaming in the cold air. The sun was beginning to dip below the tree-line, painting the sky in strokes of orange and purple. We didn't talk. We just sat, our shoulders pressed together, watching the day end. The silence wasn't empty or awkward. It was full. It was peaceful. It was the comfortable quiet of 2 people who had finally found their way to the same place. I thought about the man I was when I'd driven up that gravel road just 2 days ago, a passive observer, a professional piner, a man so afraid of being hurt that he had walled himself into a life of quiet isolation. I had come here to check on my friend, to make sure he was okay. I never imagined that in doing so, I would find the missing piece of myself. I had spent a decade watching Miles live his life, and now, he was inviting me to build a new one with him. The fear was still there, a faint hum in the background, but for the first time, it was overshadowed by a feeling so much bigger and brighter. Hope. He nudged my shoulder with his. I looked at him, and he was already looking at me, that small, knowing smile playing on his lips. He didn't have to say a word. I knew. In the quiet of the coming twilight, surrounded by the scent of pine and the promise of a fire inside, I felt it down to my bones. I was home.